clear victory. That's what President Donald Trump calls a Supreme Court decision on his travel ban executive order. A win for religious liberty. The nation's high court rules in favor of a Missouri church. We'll talk with the church's lawyer. Greek protest. Garbage piles up in the country's capital. A heat wave looms. We'll explain what's causing the mess. Plus, another step toward sainthood. A Lithuanian archbishop, a symbol of persecution, is declared blessed. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, June 26, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Big decisions made by the Supreme Court today, including one the president is calling a clear victory for his administration. The High Court will allow parts of President Trump's travel ban order to go into effect. The court says it will agree to hear the case next term, which begins in October. The order bans travel from 6 mostly Muslim countries for 90 days and was blocked by lower courts. The justices say they will also consider whether a baker who objects to same-sex marriages because of religious beliefs can refuse to make wedding cakes for a gay couple. It's a case we've been following closely on EWTN News Nightly. And Christian groups are celebrating what they see as a major win for religious freedom today. The Supreme Court rules churches have the same rights as other groups to seek state money for new playground surfaces or other non-religious needs. Jason Calvi was inside the courtroom as the decision was revealed today. Good evening, Jason. Good evening, Lauren. In a 7-2 vote, the justices sided with Trinity Lutheran Church of Columbia, Missouri. The church applied for a grant back in 2012 to put a soft surface on its preschool playground. The state rejected its application because the Missouri Constitution bans state money from going to any church or religious group.
Writing the opinion for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts says the state violated the First Amendment. That's because it denied a public benefit to an otherwise eligible recipient solely on account of its religious status. He writes, in this case, there is no dispute that Trinity Lutheran is put to the choice between being a church and receiving a government benefit. The rule is simple. No churches need apply. In dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor says the ruling weakens the nation's long-standing commitment to separation of church and state. She writes, the court today profoundly changes that relationship by holding, for the first time, that the Constitution requires the government to provide public funds directly to a church. Frank Scatoro, a Catholic lawyer inside the courtroom today, says that line of thinking is troubling. He says the majority got it right.
It's an extension of the principle that you cannot deny fire and police protection to an entity just because it's a church. Imagine a church is on fire. Is the fire department going to say, would it even be permitted to say, well, we're not going to put out this fire because the entity that is in flames is a religious institution? Well, no.
The Catholic League says this case tackles the Blaine Amendment, a provision in 38 state constitutions. That amendment bans state funds from going to private religious schools. The group, Catholic League, says it's part of historic anti-Catholic bias in the United States. Lauren?
Jason, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is praising this decision. Tell us what her take is on it.
She's a longtime supporter of school vouchers, and she says this ruling shows that programs designed to help students will no longer be discriminated against just because of their religious affiliation. And this is a similar sentiment we saw in a just released statement from the U.S. Bishops' Conference. They're praising the decision, calling it landmark. Lauren?
Correspondent Jason Calvi outside the Supreme Court. Thank you, Jason. The law firm representing Trinity Lutheran Church describes the Supreme Court's decision as an important precedent to protect religious freedom. Joining us now is Michael Ferris, President and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom, a nonprofit legal organization advocating for the rights of people to freely live out their faith. Welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure to be here.
What a big day for you, huh?
It's a great day. The Supreme Court held that religious equality It is the right of every American citizen, including religious people.
Well, we heard from our reporter Jason Calvi about the nuts and bolts of this case, the Trinity Lutheran case. What does it mean for the country?
Well, it reaffirms a broad principle in a newer and broader context. And that principle is this: religious people are not second-class citizens. If the government decides to open up a general program and wants to keep religious people or religious groups out, that's an unconstitutional denial of the free exercise of religion. There's an equality component in the Free Exercise Clause that was importantly affirmed and to some degree expanded today.
Well, there were some dissenters in this. Justice Sonia Sotomayor didn't like it. She said it weakens the country's commitment to separation of church and state. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg says that it profoundly changes the relationship between the two. Is that true?
No, it's not true. The Supreme Court ruled in a separate case a couple of decades ago. I happen to have argued that older case 9-0 that it does not violate the Establishment Clause, the so-called separation of church and states, to include religious people or religious institutions in government programs. That was the Witters case. And they are simply trying to rail against a long-standing majority, a unanimous majority opinion of the Supreme Court. Their views are really an extreme minority. I think they're outliers. The mainstream decision here is the 7 votes that we saw.
Well, the justices also said that they are going to hear Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Right. And you represent the owner of Masterpiece.
Yes.
So Jack Phillips, who declined to design and bake a cake because he said that the same-sex wedding violated his religious beliefs. That was in 2012. What is at stake in that case?
Well, this is probably the pivotal case on the whole issue of the clash between same-sex marriage and the right of religious dissenters. We have another case in the pipeline involving a florist. In both of these cases, the issue is not whether or not they will serve gay people. They always have served gay people. The question is, can they be forced to create a creative message through culinary arts or floral arts or other arts that require them to endorse the same-sex wedding? That's the difference. In the Obergefell decision, Justice Kennedy say, we're not going to trample on religious people. Well, this case will decide whether that's true or not.
And we will find that out later next year.
That's right.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael Ferris, President and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom.
Thank you very much.
The Supreme Court allows the Trump administration to go forward with a limited version of its travel ban. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The justices will hear full arguments in October in a case that has stirred up heated emotions across the nation. In the meantime, in a unanimous decision, the court says the Trump administration can enforce its 90-day ban on travelers from 6 mostly Muslim countries.
President Trump is hailing the High Court's order as a clear victory for national security. In a statement, the president says, #1 responsibility as commander-in-chief is to keep the American people safe. The administration says the ban allows an internal review of screening procedures for visa applicants from the 6 countries: Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen.
The Department of Justice in particular is reviewing this in terms of both its implementation and its impact. So I don't want to get too far ahead of all of these brilliant legal minds as they review the impact. But I think, as I noted, I think the president feels he's very, very pleased with the 9-0 decision.
3 of the court's conservative justices would have let the complete bans take effect. Justice Clarence Thomas says preserving national security outweighs any hardship to people denied entry into the U.S. In their opinion, the court faulted the 2 federal appeals courts that blocked the travel policy for going too far to limit Trump's authority over immigration. But opponents say the ban is unlawful.
I'm disappointed that the court just didn't rule that a Muslim ban in and of itself is unconstitutional. That goes right to the heart of the Statue of Liberty staring at the Trump Tower in New York City.
The ban officially goes into effect 72 hours after the court's ruling, which means it's going into effect this Thursday, Lauren.
Mark, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is praising the ruling. What is he saying?
That's right, Lauren. The Attorney General's official response to the ruling highlighted the great responsibility presidents have to ensure the national security of our country. He says he is committed to defending the president's ability to exercise that responsibility.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. Face-to-face, President Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin will be in Germany for a multinational summit next month, while the president has pressed for a meeting with Putin. Many administration officials believe the U.S. needs to maintain its distance from Russia. A special prosecutor is looking into possible collusion during the election. And Russia's ambassador to the U.S. is expected to step down and return to Moscow soon. Sergei Kislyak has served in his post for nearly a decade and is at the center of that collusion probe between Moscow and the Trump campaign. Russian officials stress the move was planned in advance and had nothing to do with the ongoing investigation. Nearly 160 people are dead after a massive fuel tank fire in Pakistan. Dozens of others are hurt. The truck was carrying 6,600 gallons of gasoline when the driver lost control and crashed on a highway yesterday. Many people were burned as they tried to collect some of the spilled fuel. Turkey's president rejects a demand by the Gulf states to remove Turkish troops from Qatar. President Erdogan is pledging his support for that country. Qatar is facing sanctions from its neighbors for its alleged support of terrorism. National security correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is calling on Qatar and the major Arab states to resolve the diplomatic crisis, but now Turkey is only adding to mounting tension.
Bir yaklaşımı Türkiye'den istemek, bu da Türkiye'ye bir saygısızlıktır.
President Erdogan of Turkey calling demands to pull Turkish troops from Qatar disrespectful. A sentiment echoed by Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, saying Tehran will stand by Qatar's government. Both countries vow to continue providing food and supplies to Qatar. Four of its Gulf neighbors, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, closed off air, land, and sea routes on June 5th. They accused the Qatari government of supporting terrorism and destabilizing the region.
Ultimately, if it doesn't work, and Qatar is not ready to acknowledge and address its support for extremism and terrorism, we will have to come and say, fine, you part your way and you move your way.
The Arab nations promised to lift the sanctions if Qatar meets a 13-point list of demands. They include curbing diplomatic ties with Iran, cutting ties with Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, and shutting down the media network Al Jazeera.
I just find it quite incredible. It's a bit like Germany demanding Britain to close down the BBC. I mean, it's that kind of almost absurdity.
Qatar's government calls accusations it supports terrorism unjustified and baseless. Some Qataris are voicing support for their nation.
I think it's sad to see all this happening, but I guess overall Qatar is doing a good job. I mean, we thought there's going to be food shortages and all that stuff, but, you know, we didn't really feel the pinch, I guess.
Secretary Tillerson says Qatar is reviewing and considering the 13 requests by its Gulf neighbors. He admits some of them will be very difficult for Qatar to meet, but he says the first step to solving the crisis is lowering the rhetoric. Lauren?
The United States has vested interests in both Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Did Donald Trump's recent trip to Saudi Arabia have any influence on their decision to impose this blockade?
Some experts believe it could have been a factor. The blockade was imposed after President Trump delivered a speech after he visited the region calling on Muslim countries to unite against terrorism. Many experts were happy with that speech, but it's unclear yet if the blockade is directly a result of that speech. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. In Greece, garbage collectors are on strike, sparking violent protests. They've been on strike for 10 days, and that garbage is piling up. With temperatures expected to hit more than 105 degrees later this week, the Public Health Agency has issued warnings for protesters and strikers. British Prime Minister Theresa May strikes a deal with Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. It gives her enough support for her party to govern. In exchange, May's government will now pump an additional $1.2 billion over the next 2 years into Northern Ireland. Under the deal, the 10 lawmakers from the Democratic Unionist Party will back May's minority government. It will help May's agenda as Britain leaves the EU. The Vatican is expressing grave concern for a Chinese bishop who was forcibly removed from his office several weeks ago. Bishop Peter Xiao Zuman of the Wenzhou Diocese is missing. Pope Francis appointed Xiao in September and posted him to Wenzhou, which is a city in eastern China with a large Christian community. Chinese authorities do not recognize Xiao's appointment by the Vatican. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, what do we know at this point about the bishop's whereabouts and why he was abducted?
Lauren, as the Vatican statement pointed out today, the diocesan Catholic community there and the bishop's relatives have no news or reasons for his removal, nor do they know where he is being held. Since the death of his predecessor back in September, Bishop Xiao, Lauren, has been abducted already. This is the fourth time, and what many are calling attempts to force the bishop to join the Patriotic Association, which of course preaches independence of the Catholic Church in China from the Holy See, which is of course against everything the Holy See stands for. So no idea of his whereabouts as of yet. He was spotted on June 16th was the last sighting. Somebody snapped a photo of him in an airport being escorted by official guards, and nothing since then.
Unfortunately, this is not an isolated case, is it, Mary?
It isn't, Lauren. Bishop Guo Jin of Mindong was released on May 6th after he was detained for a month just this year. And the coadjutor bishop Kui Tai Fai of Chuan was taken by security officials from his sister's home back in February. His whereabouts remain unknown. And of course, as you mentioned, there are other cases as well. There were a case of two bishops, one in 2004, one in 2007, who had also been abducted, and they also died, Lauren, under suspicious circumstances. So you can understand why the Holy See is very worried about this bishop's whereabouts.
Absolutely. 1 year ago, there was a lot of hope that the Vatican-China relationship was improving. I can't imagine that things are going very well.
Lauren, these abductions, these growing tensions are happening as officials from the Vatican and Beijing are engaging in these talks behind closed doors. We've been hearing about it for so long, and as you mentioned, a year ago, there was so much hope. Vatican officials talking to the press, it seemed like an agreement was imminent, that a real turning of the page was about to happen. So this has been going on for decades. As we know, the government in China wants to have a say who the Vatican appoints as their bishops, and the Holy See is insisting that only the Pope is the one authorized to appoint bishops for the Catholic Church. Where this leads, nobody knows. We hope the momentum will continue despite this period right now of stalled negotiations and a real cooling off of relations between China and the Holy See.
And we hope that we find him very soon. Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly, Vatican correspondent. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, GOP leaders in the Senate push ahead with their health care bill. Plus, celebrating 75 years of Vatican-Japan relations. In a new report, the Congressional Budget Office estimates there will be 22 million more uninsured Americans by 2026 under the Senate health bill. Earlier today, Republican leaders revised that bill. Joining us now is Chris Jacobs, Senior Healthcare Policy Analyst at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, a conservative think tank. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Under this new provision, people who have had at least a 63-day gap in insurance in the past year would face a 6-month delay before it would take effect. Now, it's meant to discourage healthy people from getting off of their health care. Will it work, in your view?
We don't think so. We think the answer is really to repeal all of Obamacare and all of the regulations and the mandates that have driven up premiums associated with Obamacare. Premiums have more than doubled in the past 4 years since Obamacare went into effect. The bill, as currently constituted, would effectively repeal the individual mandate and set the penalty to zero, but it would leave all the regulations in place. And that's a recipe for destabilizing the insurance markets. It's also a recipe for continued higher premiums, and the American people need relief.
Well, you've written a paper, Top 10 Reasons Why This is a #fake repeal. And for you, the number one reason is what you're saying, the bill retains these insurance subsidies. What does an effective repeal, in your mind, look like?
Well, I think an effective repeal would repeal the subsidies and more specifically the regulations that are driving up the premiums.
What are those?
Primarily, it's the guaranteed issue, it's the community rating, it is the federalized approach to Washington. We've also said if states want to reimpose those regulations, at the state level, let them do so. We believe in federalism, the 10th Amendment, states' rights. If states want to do that, some states had these regulations in place prior to Obamacare.
There's language in the Senate bill defunding Planned Parenthood. Pro-life advocates think that that language is going to be scrapped. How likely is that?
Hopefully it won't be scrapped. We have tens of thousands of community health centers around the country that can provide quality care. We don't need to be giving funding to the nation's largest abortion provider.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris Jacobs, Senior Healthcare Policy Analyst at Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Thanks for having me.
Japan is marking the 75th anniversary of diplomatic ties with the Holy See. A performance of ancient Japanese theater was held in Rome on Saturday. Visitors were shown how to wear a traditional theater mask. Japan has been a strong admirer of Vatican artistic treasures. Decades ago, Japanese television sponsored the restoration of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, frescoed by Michelangelo.
L'invio in missione da parte di Gesù non garantisce ai discepoli il successo.
Pope Francis is urging Christians to proclaim the gospel without fear despite the threat of persecution. Jesus' mission, he said, did not guarantee the disciples' success, nor did it shield them from failure or suffering. Up next, Live Action's Lila Rose on a new video she says exposes Planned Parenthood. Plus, thousands attend the beatification mass for the first Catholic martyr in a former communist nation. Each day, be conscious of your duty to be a saint. It means a daily struggle in the interior life and in heroically fulfilling your duty right through to the end. That's a quote from Saint Jose Maria Escriva, founder of Opus Dei, on his feast day. A human rights pro-life organization says new video it obtained shows Planned Parenthood is refusing to help pregnant women who want to give birth to their children.
And I was just asking what kind of services you offer for pregnant women.
Pregnant women?
Yes.
Pregnant women who want to continue with the pregnancy?
Yes.
We don't offer services.
Joining us now is Lila Rose, founder and president of Live Action. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
You have a new undercover video, and it captures telephone recordings of women calling Planned Parenthood and asking for pregnancy support. Tell me what you found.
Of course. So we called over almost 100 Planned Parenthoods asking for services they actually listed on their own websites: prenatal care, adoption referral, ultrasound. And we're told that almost all of them, save 5, that Planned Parenthood did not provide those services. So this is even where they were advertising, and this is in the midst of this taxpayer funding debate where Planned Parenthood says we need the money because we offer these crucial services.
Well, and I've heard Cecile Richards say that there are other services, healthcare services, and yet your investigation shows that no, they are actually not offering them. You also sat down with a former manager at Planned Parenthood to discuss what you're calling options counseling, so adoption, other services. Tell us what that Planned Parenthood manager said.
Sure. So in our former interviews with Planned Parenthood managers, they reveal that when Planned Parenthood says options counseling and when they talk about choice, they're not talking about all the options for a pregnant mother, the prenatal care options, the adoption options, the parenting options. They're talking about 2 options, 2 kinds of abortion. Medical abortion, they say, or surgical abortion. That's what their choice is for women at their facilities, despite the fact that they're getting $1.5 million a day on behalf of, so they claim, women's health care and choice.
What do you hope to accomplish by releasing these videos?
Making the whole country aware of what the truth is, because this is a key time when Planned Parenthood is trying to get their $500 million in taxpayer money secured, and it's essential that Americans, even folks who think they support Planned Parenthood, know that they are an abortion corporation. They are not focused on women's health care. Their own annual report, Lauren, in their latest report, has said that their health care services, their cancer screenings are down, but their abortions are up, and their lack of care for pregnant mothers is astonishing, how little they actually provide that care.
Well, they're walking in, and I heard some of these tapes where it just says, no, we provide abortions.
Exactly.
And that's it.
Exactly. And now all of those that are in Congress that are going to bat for Planned Parenthood don't have a case. Their case has been women's health care, but it's clear through these tapes, it's clear through Planned Parenthood's own numbers that they're not about health care, they're about abortion. That's their focus.
Lila Rose, founder and president of Live Action, thank you for
Thanks,
joining
Lauren.
us. Finally tonight, the Catholic Church has a new blessed. Archbishop Theophilus was beatified yesterday in his native Lithuania. The priest spent many years in prisons and labor camps because of his faith before being executed in 1962. One more miracle is needed to be attributed to him before he can be declared a saint. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow for more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.